Hey everyone, I'm Chase, founder of Oak & Oscar. I am extremely excited about our next guest on the watch table. I've known Darren for years. He is an amazing collector, and I am fully convinced that he has one of the most interesting watch collections out there. He collects everything from vintage chronographs to modern examples of craftsmanship, small pieces, large pieces, serious fun, and quite literally everything in between. Darren is an attorney, a professor at Northwestern, a avid world traveler and dog lover, and an all-around great guy. Darren, welcome to the watch table. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. I always love to talk watches. I've been looking forward to this.
It is always a fun time, especially with a collection that is, frankly, so varied and interesting. I know you as the guy who has vintage chronographs, but then also these kind of oddball vintage steel pieces that are large, which is kind of unique. For example, we'll just dive right in. This Tissot, it's what, like 44 millimeters?
Yep.
Which I know one thing that you love about it is kind of that uniqueness, kind of putting yourself into that place of owning this in what, the 40s?
The 1940s, late 1930s, early
and having
1940s.
a piece that's so large.
Yeah. It's it's funny because with modern pieces, I don't care whether they're large or small typically, but something about the vintage pieces when they're small or when they're large, you wonder why were they made that way? Was it a special order? Was it military in nature? There's usually a reason because that wasn't the style at the time.
Sure.
They were sort of purpose built. And it's sort of a big palette. When the dial's that big, it has sort of a look to it with all of that space on it, which I think is sort of neat. And this Tissot is exactly one of those examples. This one was sort of unique, not only for the size, but the fact that it's steel.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the old time-only vintage pieces were chromed. Steel was expensive at the time, around the war. So it was sort of rare to make them in steel, and one wonders why they did, right? It must have been something special that caused them to do that. So that was sort of unique with this one. And of course the dial, there's sort of a sector look to it.
For sure.
Multi-tone. This is sort of right in my sweet spot, sort of what I like to wear. I find when I'm wearing watches like this one, I'm always staring at my wrist.
So it begs the question though, in 40 or 50 years, will you collect oversized Invictas? Because they're far too big for today's standards.
That is very true. I suspect...
Please say no.
I suspect I won't. I do enjoy watching those shows every now and then. But something about these larger ones always grabs me.
Sure, absolutely. So what got you into watches?
It's sort of embarrassing, actually. My parents bought me my first nice watch for graduation from college. I didn't know anything about watches. It was an Eterna.
Okay.
It could have been anything to me at that time. I never really had a watch. So we went into a watch dealer at the time that was near us, and I sort of liked the look of this Eterna.
Sure.
And so that was my watch for a little while. And I didn't know anything about movements or servicing or any of that. And eventually it wasn't keeping accurate time anymore. I took it back to the watch dealer, and they said, for $300 or $400 or $500, whatever it was, we can service your watch. And I remember thinking, this is ridiculous. I've got to pay you to keep it. They make watches with a battery, right? And I can just wear that watch and pay $2. So it was almost like offensive to me. So I said, no, thank you. And made a huge error. I said, I'm going to sell this watch and just buy a battery operated. And when I did sell, this is the early days of eBay, when eBay had just launched, I sold this, what should have been a family heirloom. I now realize I never should have done it. But in selling it and going on eBay to sell it, I noticed there was this whole watch industry, and there were all of these watches that were being sold. I'd never heard of any of them. And I was just curious, and I started looking at some of these watches, modern watches typically at that time. Vacheron and Patek. I didn't know anything about any of these. And I realized, wow, there's some pretty interesting watches, and there's sort of this group of folks that wears these watches. And so in selling the watch I should have always kept for the rest of my life, I discovered the industry. And so I sort of, must have been a year later, I made the leap and I bought a watch on eBay, a modern watch on eBay. And then I bought another. I realized people sometimes had more than one. And so that was it. I fell into the rabbit hole and developed, this would have been the early 2000s, 2001, 2002, when the community was very different. It was much smaller back then.
So one watch we have on the table here that has a very special meaning to you, something that is a combining of two hobbies, is your Simpsons watch, which I remember you showed this to me in a bar years ago. And I was just taken aback. I was like, well, wait a minute. Someone with a tremendous amount of skill, obviously engraved and enameled, and took a lot of time to make this piece so unique and special. Tell me a little bit more about how the Simpsons watch came about, and who the maker is, and how that happened.
Yeah, the Simpsons watch is a marriage of many things which are near and dear to me. So when I'm not wearing vintage watches, I tend to like independent watchmaking, sort of the small manufacturers, a little bit off the beaten track. Artur Akhmaev is originally a Russian watchmaker, and this is when he was still in Russia. He's now in the United States.
Yeah, he's out on the West Coast, I believe, now.
Exactly. Doing some incredible things.
Yeah.
He's continuing to hone his skills. I read back on a watch blog, when watch blogs were sort of bigger than they are now, there were lots of them. I read a story about Artur, and there was a Batman watch that he created for himself. It was one that he wore. I like Batman as much as the next guy, but I'm not a huge Batman fan. But I was blown away by it. As an admirer of independent watchmaking, this was sort of fun, but it was real artisanal work at the same time. I immediately reached out to him, by email. I said, I don't know if you have any interest in this, but I'm kind of a Simpsons snob, which means I like only the early Simpsons episodes. To me, The Simpsons has been off the air for over 20 years.
Sure.
That's just me.
Back when it was as a short on the comedy show, I can't remember
Was it Tracy Ullman?
Tracy Ullman,
Yeah. So that time, and then the early seasons after that, when they had all the most incredible writers in Hollywood were writing for The Simpsons. So I love that time period in The Simpsons. So I reached out and said, can I give you some episodes, and can we create sort of this timepiece? And he was overrun at that time with work. People had read this story online, and he said, I too like The Simpsons. This one really resonates with me. I want to do it. It was so much fun. I then went and got to think about what are 6 or 7 of my favorite episodes and characters from those episodes. Emailed him images from those episodes. Can you work this in somehow? I had no idea what it would look like. And so we just chose these scenes, and he went to work. I didn't see any of it while he was creating it. He drew pictures, sent me the pictures when it was all done, and I was just completely blown away. I couldn't have imagined a better outcome.
Yeah. And then another piece that has a lot of craftsmanship, and in a place that you wouldn't necessarily expect it, is this piece from Australia. Is it just shoots?
It's actually scoots. Scoots, yeah.
Got it. And this was a piece that you were talking about how, for modern day craftsmanship, it kind of combines all the things that you love.
Yeah. So Ruben Scoots he's from a place where there's not a whole lot of watchmaking, right? There's a few folks doing things there, but it's not a hotbed. You wouldn't think of it as a hotbed. And it's sort of the essence of independent watchmaking. He was someone who had gone through some difficult times in his life, and watchmaking sort of brought him out of it. It sort of helped him through some difficult times. Completely self-taught. He bought a few machines, made a few machines himself because he couldn't get them in Australia, and just trial and error. This doesn't look good. This does look good. And decided, all right, I'm going to make a small run of this. Is a run of 6.
6, yep.
So I'm going to make 6 of them, and I'm going to sort of figure it out as I go. And I was very fortunate to be one of those 6. I reached out to him early. That's why I got it. It's nothing special about me. But one thing he did say, which I liked, is he said, I'm only going to sell these to folks that I kind of get to know and feel comfortable with.
Sure.
And so we started a dialogue about just who I am and what my interest is, and kind of got to know each other a little. He said, okay, good enough. You can be one of the 6. And then throughout the process, it was updates and back and forth, and keeping us in the loop. And so, this was all him. He has no one else working with him. Everything done on this watch was just him. Some of the movement, he started with a pre-existing movement and reworked parts of it. But, there's a specialness to it, knowing that when he finished it, he said, this is the best I can do, right? This is what I've got. And he'll get better. He's already starting Series 2, and he's going to develop new skills. But there's something about just having that first one with where he sort of cut his teeth. And it's also a unique looking watch. I mean, the surface, he sort of nicked up a metal sort of steel surface to create this unique look.
It's a very honest piece.
It's a very honest piece.
Sure.
It's what I like when I'm not wearing vintage. Sort of truly independent watchmaking is something that really hits home with me.
And one of the first vintage pieces that you really started chasing after, a piece that I think a lot of people will begin with. I don't want to say begin, but Speedmasters, like the one on your wrist.
Yeah.
A pre-moon Speedy.
Yeah.
I can't remember the reference number offhand.
This is the 105003.
Okay.
So it's the last model before they put professional on the dial. This is one that sort of got me into one of the really early ones when I first sort of had my eBay experience and discovered watches. But then I started to develop a little bit of taste, at least I like to think my own taste. And I discovered vintage, and the Speedmaster, for whatever reason, I thought it was just about perfect when I first saw it. The whole moon landing and the whole story is interesting to me, and it's very real. They've certainly played it up over the years. I guess who wouldn't for marketing? But that really isn't what did it for me. It sort of seemed to me to be the perfect tool watch, the perfect watch to do things. It was for racing, auto racing and all of that at the time. Simple dial, but interesting. The way it develops patina over time, when it develops it the right way, is perfect. I think the look of a vintage Speedmaster. And then it was a matter of which one to get. There's the old 2998s, and obviously the earliest ones. The Ed White, the 105003, was just about the perfect one for me. The size is about right. I like the twisted lugs that came later, but I saw something about the straight lugs, a purity to them. The baton hands. This was the first model that had these hands, which I liked. The uncluttered dial. There's less text on it. It just this is the one. I've had a number of Speedmasters over the years. Can't keep them all, but this is the one that I'll always keep. This was the one that was always nearest and dearest to me, and I love wearing it.
Yeah. You also have these smaller brands that you like to collect that I think you described it as a piece that they hit that home run once maybe or twice, but for some reason there's no longevity. For example, this piece here, which is from I believe the 40s, this Tell, which is a chronograph that's quite a unique piece, but it has all those vibes that you might be looking for.
Yeah, it's there are so many brands that are just lost to history at this point. They never got revived. Nobody bought the name and restarted them in recent years. Tell was one of those. They didn't make that many watches. I mean, you can search and find occasional vintage Tells, but they were around for a little while and they sort of disappeared. I certainly wasn't looking for a Tell watch. I didn't really know much about them. I ran across this one in this sort of the copper and sort of the faded black dial. That look is very appealing to me. I don't know why they made this one. It doesn't look like most of their other watches. Again, it was probably something special they were doing. I don't know if it was a special order, but just the design of it blew me away. And I sort of I like wearing these lesser known brands, right? So it's nothing about the value. It's nothing about investment or collectability. It's just about an amazing, high quality, steel cased chronograph that some company that no one's ever heard of made many, many years ago. And along the same lines, is this one here. Syma is a name that people know more than Lebouille or Tell. It's, again, not really much to say. I think they still do have some new watches, but sort of like Movado, they're
Not in your
No,
world.
often a different place. This one in particular, when I first saw it, I saw a picture of it online, just a random picture. It knocked my socks off. So as a vintage chronograph collector, I could envision nothing nicer for me. Sort of a sector dial, peach gilt, so a very unique color of gilt. The condition was immaculate, a 38 millimeter steel case. This would have been a very high-end watch at the time when it was released. And I've never seen another one like it. I've seen a few Omegas with sort of similar dials. And it began sort of a journey for me with this exact watch. I reached out to the individual that owned it, who wasn't interested in selling it. But they didn't completely give me the stiff arm.
Sure, they didn't shut the door.
No.
They said, not right now.
Exactly. I felt I could come back, which I did. Many times, probably once a year, I would reach out maybe around the new year and say, hey, just checking in, Happy New Year. Any interest in moving that one along? This probably went on maybe 6 or 7 years or so.
You became buddies.
You know what? I don't know if he thought I was a buddy. He may have been sort of annoyed. Maybe that's how I ended up getting it.
I'm going to get my yearly email from Darren.
Exactly, and I'll put him off again. I wouldn't do that for almost any watch, right? There's lots of, you don't want to be a nuisance to somebody. Sure. This one was special enough, and it sort of was my sweet spot. And I figured, until he tells me no, you're not getting it, I'm going to sort of keep after it. And so finally, I don't know why, 1 year he was amenable to it. And we ended up, I ended up paying something for it and trading another timepiece against it that he liked in my collection.
Oh, okay. And if we move back to the modern world, 2 modern pieces that we haven't talked about yet. One of my favorites, of course, is our very first piece that we ever launched was the Oken Burnham. And I remember meeting you at a bar. There's a bunch of other watch collectors there, community event, and we just started chatting about watches. And you're like, I love this. Like, this is great. We connected over dogs, we connected over watches. It was such an honor and such a privilege for me because having just started this, learning about so much as I was, it was such an amazing thing to connect with folks who also connected with what was spoke to me, the brand, the designs, the everything. And it was such a really fun experience for me and something that was very memorable.
Now your space is booming, right? In terms of so many different sort of smaller watchmakers. But I think that they're not all created equally. And the fact that your watches are in demand as they are is not by accident. There's a design sort of ethos to them that carries through from this one all the way to the current offerings that you've never lost. And it's clear when you launch a new watch, you see how many of them sell that quickly. The demand is there. People recognize that it's not the same as sort of these other peer watches that one could buy in the same sort of price point. And I felt that way ever since I got it, that the design holds up. I love the sandwich dial. That's sort of a vintage thing, right? That harkens back to older times. So it's one that I love and one that I continue to wear.
Well, I appreciate that. Gosh.
True though. True, not just because I'm sitting here. It's the honest truth.
No, I really appreciate that. You hit on a lot of the things that we strive for, which I think is it's amazing to see that. So it's great.
Yeah, and the last one, which is a bit different, right? Your watch is sort of a wear anywhere, do anything watch. This one's a little bit different. So Richard Habring is an independent watchmaker who now has become much more popular, and deservedly so.
Yep.
Not only a wonderful watchmaker, but a wonderful person. So back in the day when I think he had been at IWC and had just sort of struck off on his own. He and his wife were sort of starting this watch brand. They had no idea if it was going to survive. I really liked him, and I really liked his early watches, and ended up hosting him in Chicago when he came to visit the United States. Had a sort of little watch get-together many, many, many years ago, where I met him in person. He had a couple of his watches with him, and it was a blast. I didn't have a Habring watch for a long time. I liked them, but none of them had sort of gotten me quite enough. This was a limited offering. So William Massena, who does a lot of limited runs, I think he used to be a Time Zone, worked with Habring on, I think it was 50 of them, and it was like sort of a friends and family watch. So people who sort of were friends with Richard or friends with William. I'm never on the inside of any of those things. One of them I was, this one. And this one, again, I wasn't looking for this kind of watch at this time, but again, it just knocked me off my feet. Again, the step case, so there's a bit of that sort of vintage look. The bitonal sort of salmon dial, sector dial. Again, this sort of is an homage to certain of the older Pateks and Longines. But what I liked about it is it wasn't a copy. It wasn't an exact match of any of them. And he added a little flair to it. He created a dead seconds complication.
Which is always fun.
Which is a lot of fun. It's as much as we try to escape that, if we don't like quartz, we want to get back to it when it's mechanical. So that was just a little flair that he added, making it sort of modern, but harkening back to the olden days. So another one that I really I enjoy wearing, both because I love the look of the watch, and I really like the watchmaker, a good guy.
Absolutely. Well, I think that actually brings us to our rapid fire questions.
All right.
Are you ready?
Rapid. I don't know if I'm ready, but
Okay.
I'll certainly do my best.
Okay. If you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be?
Boy, that's a good one. I think if I could live anywhere in the world, it would be somewhere near mountains and the ocean. So I'm not asking for much. In terms of where that would be, I don't know, maybe Central America somewhere.
Okay.
I've had some good travel experiences in Panama.
Okay.
And in Belize. Now, you don't get some of the big mountains, but there's some terrain in these places.
Yes. Anything, where we're from in Chicago, anything over like 100 feet is like a mountain.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And, obviously we're not near an ocean. We have the lake.
Lake Michigan, you can't even see the other side.
Exactly. That's what I tell people who live near the ocean. That's how I make myself feel better. But maybe somewhere in Central America, not far from the ocean.
Okay. Favorite complication?
Probably the chronograph, and not because I use chronographs. I never use them, ever. It's sort of the look of it. It appeals to me, and in particular when there's either two registers side by side or three, but when they're up down, they don't appeal to me as much to my eye.
I actually completely agree.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't know why that's the case, but I just love the look, and I also love what they were designed for. Back in the day, they were really used, and they were, whether it was military or auto racing or back to the moon, Apollo 13.
Pulsation dials,
Absolutely. Medical. They really had a purpose.
Yeah.
And even though they don't serve that purpose for me today, there's something to that, knowing that that's what they were designed for.
What's your favorite drink?
Bourbon.
Oh.
Straight bourbon.
Awesome.
That's it.
It was easy.
Yeah.
Who would win in a fight? Homer Simpson or Moe?
I'm going to say Homer Simpson because there was actually an episode back during the snobby years, one of the great episodes where Homer becomes a boxer. And the way he beats everybody until he gets up against a Mike Tyson character. It's a play on Mike Tyson.
I think I remember this episode.
He's just this big, overweight, out of shape lug, but he can take 1,000 hits to the head.
Yep.
And by the end of each boxing, by the end of each match, the other guy falls to the ground because he's exhausted, and then Homer touches him and wins until I think it's Dredrick Thomas. I forget what the name of the professional boxer that he fights is. And Moe throws the towel to save his life before he's about to take one last punch. So other than that boxer, I think Homer can beat anybody.
I forgot about that episode, and of course you didn't.
Yeah.
I would have thought Moe, because he's that scrappy bartender, dealt with a lot of people his life.
Moe trained him in that episode.
I remember with the towel.
Him.
That's so. That was awesome. I think one more question. Let me get to the last one. Is if you could have any superpower, what would it be?
Any superpower? Boy, that's a good one. I would want to be able to go either back or forward in time. I don't even know if that is a real superpower.
It's not real. It's not something anyone can do. So that seemed like a superpower.
So it is one then.
Yes.
To be able to go back and
time
visit
travel.
Exact time. That's a better way to say it.
Wow.
Time travel. I'm always fascinated to think if you could put me 2,000 years in the future for an hour.
Collect Invictas.
Yeah,
It'd be
exactly.
great.
Yeah.
Oversized watches and
That's
why do
all
people...
that's changed.
Yeah.
That's all that's changed. Or to go back, obviously. So
Yes.
that's what fascinates me.
Last one is how many date discs are in this little jar?
Wow, that's a tough one. Seems easy because it's a small jar. 180.
180.
That's my guess.
All right, 180. Well, with that, a huge thank you and cheers.
Thank you for having me. This was a blast.